I was savoring my morning coffee, letting the peaceful silence of my property settle around me like a warm blanket. Then, I noticed something that nearly sent my hot brew down the wrong pipe. A long line of SUVs, campers, and sedans snaked down my private gravel driveway, their tires spitting up dust devils as they rumbled closer. At first, I thought maybe I drifted off and was having some bizarre dream, but no, the unfolding chaos was undeniably real. People were spilling out of their vehicles, stretching their arms, and yawning as if they'd just arrived at some five-star vacation resort. A few started wrestling with tents, others lugged out enormous coolers, and some were already scouting out prime spots to pitch their makeshift camps. I stood there, my ceramic mug still clutched in my hand, utterly dumbfounded. What in the Sam Hill was happening? Then, I spotted her, Brenda, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, clipboard clutched in her hand like a scepter. Her blonde bob bounced with each self-important stride as she marched forward, looking like some kind of self-appointed general leading her ragtag army. She wore that smug, oh so familiar expression that screamed, "I'm in charge here." My blood started to simmer. I took a deep breath, carefully setting my coffee down on the porch railing before I ended up wearing it. Stepping off the porch, I walked toward the growing throng. People were hammering stakes into the ground with alarming enthusiasm, setting up flimsy-looking folding chairs, and even unrolling sleeping bags as if they were claiming their territory in a national park. "Morning, neighbor," Brenda chirped at me, her voice dripping with false sweetness, like we were long-lost best friends. "We appreciate your generous donation to the HOA's annual camping retreat." I blinked. "My what?" Brenda laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be silly. I told the HOA we needed a community getaway, and your property is just perfect for it. Plenty of space, far away from the city noise, and it's not like you're using it for anything important." My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. "Brenda, this is my property. Private property. None of these people have permission to be here." As I watched the last of the campers disappear down my driveway, leaving behind a scattering of forgotten trash and a few deeply trampled patches of grass, I took another deep breath. The silence was finally back, a sweet, welcome sound after the earlier cacophony. My property, my sanctuary, was mine again. Titan and the rest of the pack slowly relaxed, their ears no longer perked up in high alert. Shadow gave a low, satisfied huff before flopping down on the porch, stretching her long legs out lazily. It was over. At least, that's what I thought. Just as I turned to head inside, I heard the unmistakable screech of tires on gravel. My jaw clenched. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. Brenda's shiny black SUV came to an aggressive halt at the edge of my driveway, and she practically threw the door open as she stepped out, seething. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with pure, unadulterated rage. The moment our eyes met, she jabbed a finger in my direction. "This isn't over," she snapped, marching toward me as if she could somehow intimidate me into backing down. "You think you can just embarrass me like that? You think you can just throw me off of my community's land?" I didn't move, simply stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. She was desperate for a reaction, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. "This isn't your community's land, Brenda," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This is my property. You and your little HOA fantasy have no authority here." Her lip curled in utter frustration. "You don't belong here. You live among us, but you refuse to contribute. You refuse to follow the rules that keep this neighborhood together." I let out a dry chuckle, the absurdity of her statement hitting me. "Your rules? The ones I never agreed to? You don't get to decide what I do with my own property, Brenda." She stomped her foot like a petulant child. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. They think I have no power now. Do you realize what you've done?" I smirked, a genuine, albeit slightly wicked, smile spreading across my face. "Yeah. I reminded them that you're not as important as you think you are." Her face turned a deep shade of crimson. For a fleeting second, I thought she was going to launch into another tirade, but instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath and visibly composed herself. That was never a good sign. It meant she was scheming. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences," she said in a sickly sweet tone, her eyes glinting with something that almost looked like satisfaction. "Because I have friends who are very well connected. You may have gotten the police on your side this time, but let's see what happens when the county gets involved. You will regret this." I crossed my arms, leaning slightly against a porch railing. "I doubt it." With one final, venomous glare that could curdle milk, she turned on her heel, stormed back to her SUV, and slammed the door with such force that it echoed through the suddenly quiet air. She backed up so fast that her tires spun, kicking up a shower of gravel, then sped off down the road, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the air. I watched her go, shaking my head. If she wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on my property. I had security cameras installed in strategic locations, motion sensors near the fence line, and of course, my ever-vigilant dogs. I wasn't about to let Brenda pull any surprises. Sure enough, it didn't take long before I found out what she was up to. A crisp white envelope arrived in my mailbox, stamped with the official county seal. My stomach clenched with a mixture of apprehension and annoyance as I opened it, scanning the formal language. A complaint had been filed against me, alleging that my property was being used in a way that violated community standards. There was talk of environmental concerns, public safety hazards, and even some vague accusations about noise violations. In short, Brenda had actually gone through with her ridiculous threat. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Did she really think this was going to scare me? I made a few phone calls, gathered all my property documentation, and scheduled a meeting at the county office. When I arrived a few days later, dressed in my usual comfortable jeans and a worn-out flannel shirt, I spotted Brenda in the waiting area. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, looking like she was about to negotiate a major business deal. She shot me a smug, self-satisfied smirk when she saw me, as if she had already won. I took a seat, stretching my legs out casually, completely relaxed. If she thought she had me cornered, she was about to be sorely disappointed. A clerk called our names, and we were led into a small, somewhat stuffy office where a middle-aged county official sat behind a mountain of paperwork. He adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the complaint. "All right," he said, looking between the two of us, "we have a report here claiming that your property has been improperly used as an unsanctioned event space, that you have hazardous materials on site, and that your animals pose a public safety threat. Is that correct?" Brenda immediately sat up straighter, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "Yes. He has vicious attack dogs that nearly mauled innocent families, and his property is completely unsafe for the community. There's manure everywhere, and who knows what else." The official turned to me, his expression neutral. "Sir, do you have anything to say in response?" I pulled out my own meticulously organized folder and placed it on his desk. "I have documented evidence, including video footage, that Brenda and approximately 100 other individuals trespassed on my private property without my explicit permission. I also have security footage clearly showing that my dogs never left my property and did not harm anyone. They were under my control, are highly trained, and were simply acting to protect my land from unauthorized intrusion." The official frowned slightly as he began to flip through the documents. Brenda's confident smirk was slowly starting to waver. "Furthermore," I continued, reaching into my folder again, "I have the official police report from the officers who responded to the incident that day. It confirms that Brenda organized an illegal gathering on my property and that she had absolutely no legal right to be there." Brenda's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. The official sighed, rubbing his temples wearily. "Ma'am," he said, looking directly at Brenda, "do you realize that this complaint holds absolutely no legal weight? This land is clearly privately owned, and the HOA has no legal jurisdiction whatsoever over it. Based on the evidence presented, there is no violation here. Brenda's face twisted with incandescent fury. But she turned to me, her eyes burning with raw resentment. You can't just get away with this. I smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile this time. Looks like I can. The official gave Brenda a pointed look. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you refrain from filing any further baseless complaints. Otherwise, you might find yourself on the receiving end of legal action. Brenda's entire body went rigid. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line, and her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles were bone white. She shot me one last look, pure, unadulterated hatred blazing in her eyes, but she knew she had lost. Again. Without another word, she stood up abruptly and stormed out of the office, the click of her expensive heels echoing in the suddenly quiet room. I watched her go, shaking my head. Some people just never learn when to quit. As I stepped out into the fresh air, the weight of the past few days finally lifted from my shoulders. I took a deep, cleansing breath. It was over. This time, for real. Brenda had tried everything: manipulation, lies, even legal threats, and she had failed at every single turn. That night, as I sat on my porch, watching the vibrant colors of the sunset paint the sky, Titan rested his massive head on my lap, his tail thumping a slow, contented rhythm against the wooden floor. Shadow and the rest of the pack were sprawled out around me, completely at peace. I sipped my drink, savoring the quiet, knowing that no matter what ridiculous scheme Brenda cooked up next, she would always be met with the same unyielding reality: this property was mine, and no amount of HOA nonsense was ever going to change that. Valuable lesson: this story highlights the importance of knowing your rights as a property owner and standing your ground against those who try to overstep their boundaries. It also serves as a reminder that politeness and reason don't always work, and sometimes you need to be firm and assertive to protect what is rightfully yours. Don't let anyone, even a pushy neighbor or an overreaching HOA, bully you into giving up your rights. What are your thoughts on this situation? Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like Brenda? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more engaging content. She gave me that infuriatingly patronizing smile that always sent my blood pressure soaring. Well, technically, the HOA agreed that we should have a shared outdoor experience, and since you're part of the neighborhood I am not part of the HOA, I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut through steel. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on her face. Well, you should be. And the rest of us have already made arrangements. It's just one weekend, and honestly, you should be grateful to be included. Grateful? Was she serious? I scanned the scene. Someone had already started a roaring fire in a makeshift pit. Kids were tearing around, shrieking with laughter. And a guy in ridiculously loud Hawaiian shirt was attempting to string up a hammock between two of my mature oak trees. This is trespassing, I said, barely keeping my temper in check. You need to tell everyone to leave. Now. Brenda scoffed. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. We're all neighbors. It's just camping. Just camping? I repeated, my voice rising. On my land, with 100 uninvited guests? Before I could unleash the full force of my fury, I heard a loud splat followed by a high-pitched shriek. A teenage girl had apparently misjudged her step and landed squarely in a fresh pile of cow manure. You! Gross! There's poop everywhere! She screamed, hopping on one foot like she was doing some bizarre jig. Her mom gasped, her face paling. Wait a minute. You mean this isn't a cleaned-up campsite? Brenda hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Well, technically, no. But you mean there are no bathrooms? Someone else called out, their voice laced with horror. A man in the aforementioned Hawaiian shirt sniffed the air dramatically. And what's that smell? I fought back the urge to burst out laughing. This wasn't some manicured campground. It was raw, untouched property, filled with all the glorious hazards of nature. Brenda, however, was still determined to dig herself deeper into this ridiculous situation. She turned back to me, her hands planted firmly on her hips. "Look," she said, her voice tight with exasperation, "we've already planned this. People have taken time off work. Some even brought RVs. It's too late to cancel." "Not my problem," I said flatly, my arms crossed. She glared at me as if I were personally responsible for ruining her perfectly planned community event. "Well, technically, since the HOA agreed for the last time, Brenda," I snapped, my voice echoing across my property, "the HOA has zero control over my land. You and every single person here are trespassing." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the campers were starting to shift uncomfortably, the realization dawning on their faces that they might not actually have the legal right to be here. Brenda, however, was still standing her ground, her lips pursed in stubborn frustration. "Well," she huffed, "if you're going to be so selfish about it, maybe we should put it to a vote." I stared at her, utterly incredulous. "A vote? You think you can vote to take over my land?" She lifted her chin defiantly. "Well, we live in a democracy, don't we?" I ran a hand down my face, inhaling deeply, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "All right, Brenda. If you want to act like this is some kind of democracy, let me introduce you to my security detail." I reached for my cell phone and made a quick call. "It's time," I said simply before hanging up. Brenda's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Time for what?" A deep, rumbling growl interrupted her from behind the main barn. Then, they appeared, my real protectors. 6 massive dogs, each one trained, disciplined, and built like a tank, rounded the corner. Their sleek black coats gleamed under the afternoon sun, their sharp eyes locking onto the trespassers with an intensity that sent shivers down spines. People froze, their half-formed sentences hanging in the air. Someone dropped a bag of marshmallows with a soft thud. Are those friendly?" a woman whispered, nervously stepping behind her husband. I smirked. "Depends." The largest of the pack, a magnificent Belgian Malinois named Titan, let out a deep bark that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Brenda's face lost all color. You can't just bring attack dogs into this." I folded my arms. "Oh, but you can bring 100 strangers onto my land?" Titan took a slow, calculated step forward. Another dog, Shadow, followed suit, her ears pricked forward, her intelligent eyes locked on Brenda like she was a particularly interesting piece of prey. Brenda swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing. You wouldn't." I shrugged. "They're trained not to attack unless someone provokes them," I added, watching Brenda's eyes widen as the full realization of the situation dawned on her. And just like that, the so-called community camping retreat turned into sheer chaos. People started scrambling, shoving their belongings haphazardly into bags, tripping over each other in their frantic rush to leave. The guy in the Hawaiian shirt abandoned his half-strung hammock completely. A family of 4 practically sprinted to their minivan, their faces etched with panic. Brenda, now perched precariously on the hood of a shiny black SUV, shrieked, "I'm calling the police." I chuckled, pulling out my own phone. "Go ahead." I already did. And just as I said that, the flashing blue and red lights of 2 squad cars appeared at the end of my driveway. Brenda gawked at me in sheer disbelief as 2 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles. That's when the smug look finally vanished from her face, replaced by a mixture of fury and dawning panic. The campers, who had moments ago been happily setting up their dream weekend getaway, were now frozen in place, their laughter and chatter replaced by an uneasy silence. I watched as Brenda tried to compose herself, her fingers gripping the clipboard so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and marched toward the officers as if she were about to file a formal complaint at a customer service desk. "Thank goodness you're here, officers!" she exclaimed, flipping through the pages on her clipboard with exaggerated urgency. "This man has released dangerous animals on innocent families. We were just trying to enjoy a peaceful community event, and he's threatening us." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me, her voice trembling with what I knew was pure, unadulterated fake distress. "This is criminal behavior. He needs to be arrested immediately." One of the officers, a tall guy with a mustache that looked like it had seen more action than most war veterans, gave her a long, unimpressed look. He then turned to me. "Sir, you called about trespassers?" I nodded. "Yes. This is my property. I never gave anyone permission to be here, and now I've got 100 people treating my acreage like a public park. And as for the dogs," I added, glancing pointedly at Brenda, "they're just making sure no one tries anything stupid." The other officer, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a clipboard of her own, looked at Brenda. "Ma'am, do you have written permission to be here?" Brenda blinked, thrown off by the direct question. "Well, I mean, we the HOA agreed that the space would be perfect for our retreat. It's just for the weekend." The officer's expression didn't change. "That's not what I asked. Do you have written permission from the owner?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish gasping for air. She looked around desperately, clearly hoping someone would back her up, but most of the campers were now focused on frantically packing up their stuff, too nervous to get involved. The officer sighed and turned back to me. "Do you have proof this is your property, sir?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to my pickup truck, reached into the glove compartment, and pulled out a neatly organized folder. I handed it to the officer, who flipped through it with practiced efficiency. "Land registered in your name," she muttered, her eyes scanning the documents. "No HOA involvement. No shared community spaces." She snapped the folder shut and looked directly at Brenda. "Ma'am, you and everyone else here are trespassing." Brenda sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of red. That can't be right. He's part of the neighborhood. That means the HOA has jurisdiction." The officer raised a skeptical eyebrow. "That's not how property laws work. The HOA only governs members who have agreed to their rules. This man is not a member, and this land is not HOA property. You have no authority here." Brenda's face twisted into something resembling a furious cartoon villain. "But we plan this for months," she wailed, stomping her foot like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. "People took time off work. We printed schedules and everything." The officer's patience was visibly thinning. "Ma'am, that's not his problem. You can't just take over someone's land because it's convenient for you." Before Brenda could argue further, a loud, guttural growl cut through the tense air. Titan had stepped forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the ground. His ears were perked, his dark eyes locked on Brenda with an expression that almost seemed to say, "I dare you to keep talking." Brenda let out a strangled noise and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. "Why you need to get rid of those beasts?" she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at my loyal companions. I smirked. "They're on my land. Unlike you, they have permission to be here." The officer seemed to fight back a chuckle but quickly regained his serious demeanor. "All right, folks," he announced, addressing the rapidly dwindling crowd. "You've got 10 minutes to pack up and clear out. If you're still here after that, we'll start issuing citations for trespassing." A ripple of panic spread through the remaining campers. People started grabbing their belongings in a frenzy, stuffing tents into bags, dragging coolers back to their vehicles. A few grumbled under their breath about how they didn't even get to roast marshmallows, but no one dared argue with the police. Brenda, however, wasn't ready to give up. She rounded on me, her face red with frustration. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "You're ruining a community event. You're making yourself the enemy of your own neighborhood." I shrugged, utterly unfazed by her dramatic pronouncements. "I don't care about the neighborhood, Brenda. I care about my property. And next time, if you or anyone else tries this again, my dogs won't just be standing around." Her face paled slightly. You wouldn't dare. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough so that only she could hear. Try me. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut, her jaw clenching as she finally realized she had lost this battle. With one final, venomous glare, she stomped off toward her SUV, slamming the door so hard that the whole vehicle shook. I watched as the last few stragglers hurriedly loaded up their gear, throwing cautious glances at the dogs, who were still standing in formation, their imposing presence a clear deterrent. Titan let out one final, authoritative bark, as if giving them a final countdown. That was enough to send the remaining campers scrambling. The officers waited until the last vehicle had driven off, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks and a lingering sense of disbelief, before turning back to me. The mustached one tipped his hat. "Looks like you handled that pretty well, sir." I gave him a half smile, a wave of relief washing over me. "Thanks for backing me up." The female officer glanced at the dogs, then back at me, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "Got to say, that's an effective security system." I chuckled. "They're better than any alarm." She nodded. "Well, let us know if they try this again. Something tells me that woman isn't going to let it go." I sighed, already bracing myself for another Brenda-sized headache in the future. "I'll be ready." The officers got back into their vehicles and drove off, leaving me alone with my property once again. I took a deep breath, finally letting my shoulders relax. The quiet had returned, and with it, a deep sense of satisfaction. I turned to my dogs, who were now sitting attentively, their eyes still scanning the area. "Good job, guys." Titan wagged his massive tail, and Shadow gave me a quick nuzzle before trotting off to resume her patrol of the property. I picked up my coffee, now lukewarm, but I didn't care. I had won. My property was mine again, and Brenda, well, she had just learned a very important lesson about messing with the wrong neighbor.